Hi, this is Jason Palmisano, founder and CEO of Trinity Fitness, addressing the question, how to predict your future. That's right, how to predict your future. Now, I know that sounds like a really provocative title. Like, how can that be? Really? And I don't want to be misleading. So first of all, let me say, yeah, I think we can predict. Some parts of our future are predictable, but I'm not talking about, and here's why I don't want to be misleading, I'm not talking about things like, who am I going to marry? What's going to be happening tomorrow? Or how are my kids going to turn out? What are they going to become? Not talking about that kind of future. All right, so let's now stay with me, because I am going to use part of God's Word, Judges chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. So if you have a Bible and want to grab it, or you don't have to do it right now, but I would encourage you to read Judges chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. Pick up a pen, highlighter, begin to underline and make notes of the things that God is teaching you, okay? So here's what I do believe about predicting your future, predicting my future. I think there are certain behaviors in our lives that absolutely dictate certain outcomes. Let me relate it to the physical world. There are definite physical laws that, when applied, we can't get around them. They're absolutely, these physical laws will steer us to a certain outcome. Let me give you an example. Newton's first law of motion says that an object at rest tends to stay at rest until it's acted upon by an outside force. It's very predictable. It's a physical law that's very predictable. For example, I'm sitting outside on my front porch. I've got a can of off for when I sit out here in the evenings to keep the mosquitoes away. If I took this can of off now, there was actually the first law of motion right there. It was sitting there at rest until I picked it up. I acted upon it as an outside force. If I were to take this can of off and chuck it across the street, I know it's very predictable. I'm aiming over there, I'm throwing in that direction, I'm the outside force acting on this object at rest, and it's going to go in that direction. Very predictable. That's a physical law. Another example would be gravity. Gravity is a physical law that we cannot get away from. If I were to jump off of my roof, I know I'm going to land. I'm going to go straight down. I'm going to land on the ground. If I throw that can of off that I just held up, I know it's going to come down, because as I throw something up, the force of gravity will absolutely make that object come down. It's very predictable. The physical laws. Just as there are physical laws that govern our universe, there's also spiritual laws that govern our universe that make things predictable in my life. I can predict what's going to be happening in my future. Now, this is awesome. I love thinking about things like this. I hope you do too. Let me share. The Bible is wonderful. It's filled with spiritual laws that kind of guide us through life and we can really predict certain outcomes. I'm going to share one of those with you this morning in a couple of places. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I say this morning, it's kind of a habit of mine. It's really whenever you're watching this video for you. But one of the spiritual laws is in Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. And it says this. I encourage you to highlight it, underline it. It says this: do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. Whatever a person sows, that they will also reap. Whatever you sow is what you're going to reap. Very predictable law. So I know that what I'm sowing spiritually, what I'm sowing in my life, I'm going to reap those things back at some point. Let me share with you an example out of the scriptures that is coming from Judges chapter 1, verse 7. Joshua just died, and there was no apparent leader. So the question that the Israelites had is, who is going to lead us to go fight in battle against the Canaanites and some folks in the land? And so that's kind of how Judges chapter 1 starts off. Now in verse 5, they're fighting. Judah leads the attack. The tribe of Judah leads the attack. They're fighting against the Canaanites and the Perizzites. and they come across one of the kings, one of the pagan kings. His name is Adoni-Bezek. Adoni-Bezek. Very interesting as we talk about how can I predict my future. And we talk about the spiritual law of reaping and sowing. Here's what Judges chapter 1, starting in verse 5 says, and I'm only going to read a couple of verses. Verse 5 says this: "It was there that they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes." That's pretty gruesome. They cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Why did they do that? Well, in verse 7, here's what we read. "Then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them." In the course of Adoni-Bezek's reign, he made it a practice that whenever he captured an enemy king, he would cut off their thumbs and their toes. And he apparently did this to 70 kings under his own admission right here. There were 70 so kings that he did this to. Why would he do that? Well, when you take a person's thumbs and big toes, especially that of a king, it's an act of humiliation, and you render that king ineffective. There is no way you can wield a sword with any effectiveness without your thumbs. You can't swing a sword. You can't defend yourself. You can't lead the people. There's no way you can navigate with any sort of agility without your big toes. Very important parts of our body, our thumbs and our big toes. Can you imagine trying to do a Trinity Fitness workout without using your thumbs or your big toes? Well, we would be hindered incredibly. But here's what Adoni-Bezek says. Here's the realization that he comes to. He goes, there's 70 kings that have eaten scraps under my table that I did that to. Now it's payback time, and it's come back on me. He's saying, in essence, he's saying, hey, I expected this at some point. Why? Because I'm going to reap what I sow. And I sowed the cutting off of thumbs and toes on so many others in my life that at some point it's going to come back on me. And we cannot get away from that spiritual law. And that's why I say how to predict your future. And in some ways you can. It's how you're behaving right now, today. What kind of seeds are you sowing around you? If I were to say, well, man, I feel like I don't have any friends, then I have to ask myself the question, who am I being friendly to? Because I'm going to reap what I sow. If somebody were to come to me and say, well, man, I feel like nobody ever encourages me, I would say, well, who are you being an encouragement to? I feel like nobody ever invites me along, or nobody ever invites me over. Well, that's hospitality. Who am I being hospitable to? Because I'm going to reap what I sow. And it works in so many areas of our lives. Think about giving. You know, I feel like things are always so tight. Well, who are you giving to? What are you giving to? Because you're going to reap what you sow. So let me close out today. I hope you find that thought-provoking. I know I do, and I want to follow up with a couple of questions. I've written them down here, so I'm just going to take a moment and read them to you. So some thoughts and questions. Well, I think that's important because that way this becomes really practical and applicable to our lives. So how have you experienced the principle of sowing and reaping in your life? How have you seen that played out, that spiritual law? That's number one. And number two, how are you doing spiritually leading your own life? What changes do you need to make? So I just asked you just a few questions as examples today. You know, I feel like I don't have any friends. Who are you being friendly to? Well, I feel like nobody's welcoming. Well, who are you being welcoming to? I have to ask myself that. So are there changes in your life that you want your life to have a different outcome? Maybe we need to sow some different seeds. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you found that a blessing to you. God bless you.